Good morning. Thank you for coming on this morning. I know you're probably bleary-eyed from a really crazy week of legal analysis for CNN, right?
Yeah. We're running late and early and everything, but look, this is big, so I'm happy to do it. I've got my Sunday morning tea, my county prosecutors of New Jersey mug. That was not on purpose, but maybe, well, not that there's any charges in New Jersey, but we will be talking about potential prosecutions. So
Right, and I think it's important to draw out the distinction between local crimes and federal crimes here. But let's start with the sort of top news, which is the one single article of impeachment that's come out of the House of Representatives potentially. What is, we're hearing about impeachment, we're hearing about the 25th Amendment. And I just want to say, I want to invite you viewers to put questions in the chat, and I'll share them as we go along. But what's the difference, and which, if either, do you think is effective? And I should just say, I personally believe that it's important to do something between now and the 20th, because just because we got through the 6th doesn't mean there might not be more, violence and problems. So I guess let's start with, do you think Donald Trump is a danger between now and the 20th? And what can we do about it?
100% yes. I think he's a danger. I think he proved that beyond any doubt, any reasonable doubt last week. When it comes to the 25th Amendment or impeachment, it's funny because among us analysts, there seems to be like, which camp are you in? But the one thing I want to start by stressing is you can be in both. They're not mutually exclusive. It's not one or the other. You can do both. The reason I think impeachment is sort of more important and ultimately will be more successful, there's a couple. So the 25th Amendment, the first limitation, I think, of the 25th Amendment is this thing goes nowhere without Mike Pence. And I think people are right to pressure Mike Pence, to call on Mike Pence. But do you ultimately believe Mike Pence is going to make this dramatic move to seize power for himself away from Donald Trump? I just do not see that happening. I know they have a rift. I know Mike Pence is, maybe has some degree of civic responsibility, but to me, it seems extraordinarily unlikely. The other thing about the 25th Amendment, it's this whole tug of war, Kim, and I know you know it being a constitutional scholar, but basically, if, let's say Mike Pence was on board, right? So the VP plus a majority of the cabinet have to certify the president's unable to fill the powers and responsibilities of office. Okay. Then if that happens, power goes right over to the VP. Donald Trump can take it right back and say, nope, I'm good. I'm fine. Now, there's some debate about, does it have to wait 4 days or does he have 4 days to do it? But Trump can say, I'm taking it back. Then the VP and his team can say, counter that and say, no, you're not good. We're taking it back. And then ultimately, where does it wind up? Congress, which needs to vote by 2/3 majorities in both houses in order to kick it over to the VP, which is unlikely, but possible. That takes time. And I think one of the arguments for it is, during that time, during that struggle, he'll be out of office. But I think it's really going to pass back and forth. And that worries me. The reason impeachment, I think, is better is A, you don't need Mike Pence. B, you only need half the House, not 2/3, as ultimately you would need in the 25th Amendment. And C, you can disqualify Donald Trump for the future from ever running for office again through impeachment. But 25th Amendment has nothing to do with that. So, on the other hand, I do understand the point that, practically speaking, they're not going to be able to impeach, convict, and remove by the 20th. So that is a limitation, and maybe an argument for why they should be doing both. But they really starts with Mike Pence. I have no faith Mike Pence is going to go down that road. So what do you think about those two things?
Well, I think there's a little bit of ambiguity in terms of where the power lodges. I mean, I've looked at some former Office of Legal Counsel, analysis, CRS reports, and I think I'll let you hang on. I think
that's just that's for Wi-Fi purposes. Got to open the door.
Oh, I appreciate that actually, because sometimes that gets tricky. I think once I agree with you. The Constitution is very clear. Once the letter goes to Congress, if Mike Pence, who we're reading now, was potentially going, some of the protesters literally wanted to drag him and hang him. And we saw that there was a noose actually erected outside of the Capitol. So Mike Pence might be, we don't know, in a different posture vis-a-vis the president in this moment, given that he physically was thrown, or literally was thrown under the bus potentially in terms of his own safety on Wednesday by the president. But assuming I agree, big political gamble, the Constitution divests him of the power once he sends the letter. The president can say, no, actually, I'm fine. Then they come back and say, no, you're not fine.
Right.
I think it's possible to read that as like a preliminary injunction. He loses the power until 21 days. But Elie, this all comes down, as you know, to say, listen, Donald Trump, you lost your power. He's not going to leave. So even if legally Mike Pence under the 25th Amendment had the power pending a resolution by Congress to give it back to Donald Trump or to lodge it permanently in Mike Pence, in my mind, all of this comes down to, how are you gonna make him do it?
Right.
And I think that's not unlike if there were a decision to remove him breakneck speed, which would require Mitch McConnell to call Senate back from recess, which is another big political if.
Right. So let me say this. I think if noon on January 20th, he'll be gone. I don't think he'll be sitting, chaining himself to the radiator in the White House beyond noon on January 20th, no matter what. If nothing else, because his ego won't permit it. Because he'll be in Mar-a-Lago or his place in Scotland.
I agree on the 20th. Yeah.
But before that, one of the downsides to me of the 25th is exactly that ambiguity that you mentioned. And you know the Constitution as well as anybody. I mean, we've been sitting there, we Twitter scholars and George Conway and me and others are like agonizing over what happens during these interim periods of the 25th. And it's so poorly written. You can read it to say, for example, when the vice president first invokes, then the president says, I'm good. Does the vice president then have 4 days to recertify, or does it switch back? The point is, it would put us into a hugely disputed territory where we don't honestly know who's in charge, where there could be court suits about what does this 21-day period mean? What does this 4-day period mean? Who has it during the interim? Then we would have complete and utter chaos. Then we would not be able to definitively answer the question during some of that time of who is the president right now. That could be in the courts, and that could be really messy. So to me, that's, also the downsides of the 25th. But look, ultimately, I think that the discussion of the 25th is fascinating. But I mean, I can see even from the scrolling questions down here, like most of the viewers I think agree. There's no way Mike Pence does this. As horrible as much as he should, as much as any patriot, and I mean that in the real sense, not the disgusting sense these rioters use it. Anyone who has any sense of constitutional sort of integrity, backbone, self-pride, and dignity would probably do it. Mike Pence is, I just think he is conservative, lowercase c, in that he is very reluctant to take dramatic steps. This would be one of the most dramatic steps a vice president could possibly take. I just think it's so far out of character for him. I wouldn't bank on it.
Well, what are you worried about? I mean, I think part of it is that we don't really know behind the scenes what's happening. We have heard, Donald Trump was kicked off of Twitter because of talk about another insurrection or rioting attempts or whatever you want to call it on the 17th, also the day before the inauguration, on the day of the inauguration. I think it's a little odd. I thought at the time when Mike Espy, the defense secretary, was fired in December, I said something's up, right? And now we know that the chain of command stopped, right, in terms of calling out the National Guard earlier. The defense didn't sign on. We also are hearing reports of, House Representative Clyburn believes that there was some inside job letting people in the building inside doors that should have been. I mean, we have no confirmation of that. In addition, we have the 10 former secretaries of defense on last Sunday stunningly issuing a letter saying, hey, don't bring the military in to resolve the election. So I worry that there's just more shenanigans up the sleeve of whomever. And we also know 8 months, the Russians have been hacking our, both, federal and private servers, over 250, and the government didn't even know about it. We found out from a private company. So what do the Russians know? It included the Department of Energy, which of course manages the nuclear codes. So Elie, as a former law enforcement prosecutor, somebody who's deeply involved in this as your full-time job, in the moment of complete urgency, what is there? If there is if there is some urgency between now and the 20th? What
Yeah.
can be done? Could he be arrested, the president?
So he won't be charged and arrested by DOJ in the next 11 days or 10 days or whatever we have left. He could be as soon as he's out, and that's because of the longstanding DOJ policy against indicting a sitting president, which may be worth revisiting, but that's been on the books for a long time. That's not some Donald Trump creation that goes back to the 1970s. So let me sort of break this into a couple things. What am I afraid of? I mean, I think we got a primer last week in just how quickly the vast powers of the presidency, constitutional powers, but even just persuasive powers, can lead to grave danger for this country within hours, within days. And until he's out of office, he holds every constitutional power. I get a lot of questions through CNN viewers going, oh, but doesn't he lose, now that he's a lame duck or now that he's been impeached once, doesn't he lose the pardon power? No, he doesn't lose any power. So what can he still do? He's the commander-in-chief, like you said. He controls the military. He's the head of the executive branch. He controls our foreign affairs, foreign relations. I mean, less sort of drastic, but still worrisome. He holds the pardon power up until the very end. And maybe we can talk. I mean, there's the possibilities of when he could do that with that, up to and including pardoning people involved in the Capitol riot. I mean, that's purely hypothetical, but it's possible, are truly alarming. And like you said, I mean, it's good that he's off Twitter, but he still has ways to encourage people to do more, to foment more of this. This isn't over. We're going to have the inauguration. That's the highest security event that our country holds. So I think all of those things are dangerous. From a prosecutorial point of view, you know, I'm a realist. I understand that prosecutors across the country, federal and state alike, and I was both, are going to be very hesitant to charge Donald Trump with a crime, because I think as a practical matter, if you're sitting there in a DA's chair, in a U.S. attorney's chair, in the next Attorney General of the United States chair, which Merrick Garland will be occupying, I think as a realist, you think, if I'm going to bring a criminal charge, United States of America versus Donald J. Trump, state of Georgia versus Donald J. Trump, to pick one randomly, that is going to absorb all the attention in the world for however long it takes to get that case tried. You're going to try a jury trial against Donald Trump. I mean, that is going to be a circus to end all circuses. I understand that, but it bothers me, this idea, and we're already seeing it. There's already reporting that DOJ is focusing on the people inside the Capitol, but not others. That really bothers me as a former prosecutor, because it's so easy to go after what we call the low-hanging fruit, the obvious people, the people who physically committed the crimes. But that's not what a good prosecutor does. A good prosecutor always asks, how high did this go? And there was an ethic, especially at the SDNY where I used to work, where it was almost embarrassing if you just arrested the sort of obvious people. Especially, I used to do mob cases, right? All these crimes that happened, you knew they were sanctioned by someone higher. They couldn't happen unless someone up the chain had authorized them or instructed them to happen. And so it was seen as sort of embarrassing if you couldn't link it up, or if you weren't willing to charge the higher people. It's harder to make those cases. But I was sort of raised with this ethic of, you don't just go after the people who commit the crime. You go after the people who put them up to it, who incited them, who aided and abetted, who conspired, whatever term you want to use. And so I really hope prosecutors don't take the easy route here. It's not the job of a prosecutor to say, well, that's too difficult, let me stick with the easy ones.
So can you explain then what the difference is in jurisdiction between, state and federal crimes, and how, granted, you don't have the evidence, we don't have a grand jury, you're not in a position to actually make a charging decision, but we have a lot of video and we have a lot of reporting. What are the kinds of things, who in the higher up chain of command is potentially in the loop of investigation, and for what? And then just a follow-up to my earlier question, is there anything banning DC police from arresting someone high up, including Donald Trump, if he was a threat to national security for violation of a local crime? That does not covered clearly by the DOJ memo.
Yeah. So, okay. So the way people, I think, should think about it is, we have 51 justice systems in this country, 51 prosecutorial systems, right? One federal system, and then each state has its own. DC is a little complicated because DC sort of has the traditional federal crimes, and then they have their local crimes, which normally would be state crimes, but because it's DC, they're federal too. Okay, so that's the landscape here. Can a state prosecutor arrest a sitting president? Probably. I mean, we don't quite know. No one's ever tried it. I think the president would make the same arguments that DOJ makes in its memo, and that it would be too disruptive to the executive branch. How would I investigate this case? I mean, you start with the people in the Capitol. Look, there is an embarrassment of riches when it comes to the evidence in this case. The people who are in there are creating the evidence. I mean, if you look at all the, first of all, there's tons of video. It's on there. There's not only cell phone video there. You know, if you look at those clips of the crowds, it's like a concert. Like they've all got their phones up. They're all recording themselves and each other. I mean, all of that is out there. They're posting it on social media. So you really have to harvest that. It shouldn't be too hard to figure out who's who. They've already started to do that. I think several dozen arrests have been made. You know, you pull the surveillance video. I mean, I can't imagine there's many buildings in the world that have more surveillance video than the U.S. Capitol. So again, it's possible to identify a lot of those people. I mean, look, a lot of people were wearing face gear and masks and all that. I'm not confident they'll be able to identify every single person who stepped foot in there. But the key people, and they've already started to do this, the people who caused the most destruction and damage, I think can be identified. And it needs to be done on a coordinated basis. One of the things I think about if I was moving into the Biden administration is, why don't we do a task force or a special counsel that will coordinate all of these? Make sure that they're investigated in a consistent way, that they're charged in a consistent way. That I think they all should be charged in D.C., not in their home districts. There's some federal crimes where you might be able to charge if someone traveled from, let's say, where I live, New Jersey, down there. There's some argument you can charge them in New Jersey. They should all be charged in D.C. That's where they physically committed the crimes. But again, you want to go beyond that. And if the question is, how do you make a case against an instigator, an inciter, look at their own words. Look at the things they tweeted. Look at Donald Trump's own tweets. Look at his public statements. Come down on January 6th. We'll be wild, right? The things he said at the rally, there's ample videotape of that. I mean, Rudy Giuliani saying trial by combat. You know, Mo Woods or Mo Brooks. I'm sorry. You know, that representative who's saying crazy rhetoric. Even Donald Trump. We're going down to the Capitol. We're going to show strength. And to me, the best piece of evidence, the one I think is strongest, is look at Donald Trump's statements after they did what they did, after they tore the Capitol apart. He praised them. He thanked them. He said, "We love you. You're special." He said, "You're American, great patriots." He said, "We will remember this day forever." I mean, that to me shows they did exactly what he wanted, exactly what he intended. And that gives rise to potential criminal liability for inciting, aiding, and abetting, that kind of thing. So that's how I would try to put those cases together.
Inciting, aiding, and abetting, riot, or sedition is also a crime, which is against the government, a riot specifically against the government. So back to impeachment, assuming, because like for the viewers, so people understand, impeachment is basically a trial in the Congress. The House indicts instead of a grand jury. This got distorted the last round because Republicans wouldn't take any witnesses. But I think a trial involves evidence. I mean, we know this. If you were in charge, and it's interesting, one of our colleagues from MSNBC ended up one of the primary impeachment prosecutors the last
one of my good friends.
Right. So say it was you. Okay. What pieces of evidence are you putting before the United States Senate to get this done as quickly as possible? Yeah.
So look, the task that Dan Goldman and his team had was immensely more complicated than this. They had to dig into old phone calls. They had witnesses being blocked. Key eyewitnesses were being blocked by the executive branch. They had I've said this publicly. I've said this to Dan. The fact that they pulled that case together the way they did is remarkable. This is much, much easier. I don't even know if you need an eyewitness. I mean, I would display the tweets up on the screen. I would play the footage of the rally, moments before they stormed the Capitol. I'd show footage of the Capitol, and I'd show Donald Trump's reaction. That would be my case. I mean, you would add some color. You'd maybe call a couple of witnesses who were inside the Capitol building. I think some of these folks who are now being arrested are saying, "I did it because what the president said."
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure that would be technically admissible in a criminal trial, but in an impeachment trial, anything goes. So I think that's a good piece of evidence too. I mean, honestly, you could put that case on in a day. You could put that case on in an 8-10 hour day, or 2 days, 2 afternoons. So I think that can happen really, really quickly. And if there's one thing we learned from last year's impeachment, it's crazy that we now have annual impeachments. It's that in the Senate, you don't need to put in any more evidence. The Senate said, no last year. You remember this. We're not going to hear any more evidence. Even though there was John Bolton, all these key witnesses who nobody heard from, the Senate just wanted it over with. They said, no, we're going to go based on what they did in the House, and that's not enough. Well, Okay, put it all in the House. They'll vote to impeach, and then Senate, you can just go right to your vote.
Yeah, that's a great point. So if the argument was, listen, we need more time, this is too rushed, wait a minute, that didn't apply before. And I think it's important, again, this is not in the Constitution, but just so people understand, 2/3 to convict. But historically, when it comes to impeaching judges, to ban someone from running again, that's a bare majority. And
That's
so
half.
once the two senators from Georgia are seated, certified and seated, that can happen. And there's nothing precluding that from happening post inauguration with Joe Biden.
I do wonder, let me ask you this, Kim, because you may, if anyone would know this, you would. I don't know that we do, because people should understand there's very little precedent out there. I mean, impeachment is very rare. What if the House impeaches, it goes to the Senate does not convict. They don't get to 2/3. Let's say they have 59 senators. Can they then try to disqualify without a conviction? Can they say, okay, you've not been convicted? And by the way, this is all likely to happen after January 20th. The Senate part is likely to happen after January 20th. I wonder, can they disqualify him even without a 2/3 conviction? I don't know about
That's what I'm saying. I haven't done the deep dive in the cases, but there is precedence for the disqualification based on a bare majority without.
Right, but those guys were convicted by 2/3 first.
Oh, I see. So for purposes of the for the sentencing, yeah, no, I don't know the answer to that either.
Yeah.
Okay. What happened with law enforcement on the 6th?
Huh.
Why? I mean, can you explain?
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, I cannot explain what happened, but I can tell you what questions I have.
Okay.
First of all, how did they not know this was coming? I mean, some of the statements that have come from official authorities have been, well, we didn't have any intel on this. You didn't have any intel? Go on Twitter, go on, I don't want to say the name, but go on some of these wacky right-wing, publicly available social media sites. I mean, Jonathan Wackrow, who's a colleague of mine at CNN, who was a former Secret Service agent, runs a private firm now that does intel and security. He said on air, he goes, my junior analysts saw this coming. They wrote it up in advance. You know what I mean? It's mind-boggling that it was a failure of intelligence, first of all, meaning gathering of intelligence. They were woefully undermanned there. I mean, if you've seen some of these clips, you see at times one officer, 3 officers trying to hold off an angry horde of people. The conduct of the officers in the Capitol, based on what we've seen, really varies. There are some who really did everything right and fought hard. There's a clip today of a guy, an individual officer, who gets basically bum rushed at a door, and he's really trying to hold off this crowd, and he keeps retreating up the stairs one flight. He's doing everything right, and he's holding his ground as best he can, but he's hopelessly outnumbered. And then there's others who kind of were surprisingly passive. And what really is mind-boggling to me is the clips sort of at the end of people casually just filing out. Then officers were like, almost, right this way, sir, right this way, ma'am. I mean, look, it's hard to put yourself in an officer's shoes because you can't physically arrest everybody on the spot when you're that outmanned. They should not have been that outmanned, by the way. They did not need to be that outmanned. They could have had 20 times more people there. And why wouldn't they? It was openly broadcast that there was going to be a massive, at the minimum, protest. It became much worse than that. So I think there needs to be a real study of this. Almost a friend of mine, I think it was Mimi Rocco, who I know you know too, said essentially we need a 9/11 style commission. I'm not necessarily comparing this exactly to 9/11, but we need a serious examination of all the questions you just raised. What were the warnings? Why were they not properly heeded? Why was the personnel so light? What was the conduct of the officers inside the Capitol? I mean, there's a clip of someone who's reported to be a member of Congress opening a locked door for folks. That's not, he's not part of the security infrastructure, but we need answers on all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this is, in and around Washington. I know that we spent a lot of time here too. They know how to do protests around here. They know how to manage large crowds. They've handled every presidential inauguration. It was sitting and watching that fall apart. It was just absolutely shocking. There's something that really, really needs attention. And this is partly why I have a concern between now and the 20th. Let's talk though about Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, Mo. I mean, what can be done? Because I just want to say, I read a really interesting piece in the New York Times, which seems like maybe you've come to this conclusion on your own, but it was a real light bulb in my mind, which is a lot of these people that that showed up on Wednesday really believed Donald Trump won, and they really believed that the United States Congress has the power to hand an election to a losing candidate.
Yeah.
They really believe that. Why? Because it's not just Donald Trump, but it's been hundreds of members of the Republican Party who have basically told them lies about the Constitution itself, how American government functions, and they do believe it. So they feel that they are traitors, that Mike Pence is a traitor because this evidence is here and legally they have this power and they're turning their back on their party. So what kind of accountability, if any, should there be for not Donald Trump? I mean, that's a lot of discussion, but for the Republicans who continue to this day to nurse these lies that are ginning up these people to want to come back. They feel empowered, I think.
Yeah, look, root cause of all of this is exactly what you said. It is this lie, this fiction that the election was stolen from Donald Trump. I mean, I won't even go to, we all know every entity of any responsibility from DOJ to DHS to dozens of court judges appointed by Republicans, Democrats have all rejected that. It's an absolute fiction. And B, this sort of legal fiction that somehow Congress can throw out the results, that Mike Pence can throw out the results. And the people who spread that fiction need to be held accountable politically and perhaps legally. And let me break that down. There's some conversation out there, some maybe disagreement over when Donald Trump made that call to the Georgia Secretary of State saying, I want you to find these votes for me, which unbelievably was about a week ago somehow.
Right.
People discuss
arguably conspiracy to commit or
right.
an ask to commit election fraud. Right.
And there was some conversation of, well, maybe, does Donald Trump really believe he won those votes, or is he just trying to, encourage this person to commit fraud? And well, maybe he's delusional, maybe he's not. I don't know. Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz know better. They are not delusional people. They are, academic credentials. They're smart people. What they did is exploit this in a crass and manipulative way, I think, for their own, what they believe would be political benefit. They're all vying to inherit that base, that loyal base that ultimately will have to go somewhere, and that really is the ticket to at least the Republican nomination. And so what they did by spreading falsehoods about the election and about our legal system, I think, was a direct cause of all this. And they did it in such a crass, cynical way. Look, they could be held responsible politically by the voters in their states, for sure. I think one other reason impeachment needs to happen is all these folks, Republican, Democrat, all 535 in the House and Senate, everyone needs to be on record. Yes or no. I'm okay with this, or I'm not okay with this. And so let's see people stand with their votes. And then finally, a sort of somewhat, I guess, obscure provision of the Constitution allows the House and the Senate to each expel its own members by a 2/3 vote. Now, that's happened very rarely, if ever. I know Bob Packwood, the Oregon senator, was pushed out on, with the threat of that. Al Franken resigned under some notion that might happen, And I think back in the 1860s, some people who tried to pull an insurrection, I believe, were actually expelled. But that is very, very rarely used. I think there's probably a bit of self-protectionism. The Senate, if I expel him, they may try to expel me someday. But that's there. That exists. That exists for a reason. And also, you probably cannot impeach members of Congress because you have this expulsion. So that is an underused vehicle. But I think Hawley and Cruz in particular, look, they're getting creamed. Their hometown papers are calling for their resignations. Their political mentors are trashing them. But these guys don't care. They just glide on. They just call up their old high school debate skills and divert and glide onto the next thing and spin and obfuscate and change the narrative. They're both good at that. So I really hope this sticks with both of them, and not just them, but all over 100 members of Congress. It's mind-boggling. So they all need to be held accountable somehow.
Yeah, signed on to that AG lawsuit filed in the U.S. Supreme Court asking to cancel the votes of 4 other states, not Texas, but 4 other states. And just so people understand, this is the United States Congress basically asking the United States Supreme Court to get rid of American democracy by we the people and hand presidential elections to entrenched politicians in states. That's what they signed on for. I don't know what the word is for that. We've run out of hyperbole, superlatives to understand, but I think we have to go back to basics. I want to ask one thing though about Rudy Giuliani, right? So it was just reported he's going to now represent the president potentially in impeachment. Am I just biased, or is this man potentially going to end up charged with a crime at some point? I mean, what is happening? What would you, if you're in charge, again, you're in charge of investigating Rudy Giuliani based on what we know publicly about his actions in the past 4 years? What is on the top of your list?
Oh my God, it's a menu the size of like the Cheesecake Factory. If you ever go, you know, like the 40-page menu.
You just can't decide.
Yeah. Look, Rudy is. Let me say this first of all. I'm an SDNY alum. Rudy was head of the SDNY couple decades. He was in the 80s. I came along 20 years later. Rudy was a deeply respected figure for a long time. I started at the SDNY in 2004. The memory of 9/11 was not too far past. And he was a person we were proud of. You know, when you would explain to your friends, oh, I'm at this off. Oh, what's that? Oh, well, Rudy Giuliani was there. They go, oh, okay. You know, I mean, he was really a respected person. He was never perfect. He was controversial. He did some things that, you know, that you wouldn't want to defend throughout his career. But he was held up as this admirable figure. And now, you know, I want to be nice and I want to say, oh, I just feel sadness, but I'm not going to fake it. I don't feel sadness. I feel the man's just a complete con man and a maniac. And I just am utterly disgusted by him and everything he's done over the last couple of years. Him being the impeachment lawyer potentially for Donald Trump is about the worst single person you could think of who could represent Donald Trump. He's part of this. And I mean that in two senses. One, he was one of the leading purveyors of BS. He was one of the lead people pushing these lawsuits, pushing this election fraud narrative as loudly and aggressively and angrily as anybody. Two, he was the guy who stood up in front of that crowd, waving Confederate flags, wearing Auschwitz t-shirts. That was him. And then, I mean, so look, he could be potentially charged on a similar basis that I said to Donald Trump before. But also, Rudy is looking at all manner of legal trouble. He's reportedly been under investigation by DOJ, by the SDNY, my old office, his old office, on financial crimes, on crimes relating to this Lev Parnas guy, who, by the way, his case is still going, on potential unregistered lobbying violations. I mean, he has got problems everywhere. And to further complicate it, this guy has to be angling for a pardon of Donald Trump because, you know, that could have a real impact because the things Rudy's being investigated for reportedly are mostly federal. I don't know that there's going to be a state analog for example, unregistered foreign agent crimes. So he is a contender for pardon.
Overwhelming, right? Like people are overwhelmed. So what should viewers pay attention to? What of all of this? What's the surgical laser focus? The most important thing for regular Americans to pay attention between now and the 20th?
Yeah, number one, how quickly, well, I would say the overarching answer to that really is political will. I know you and I are sort of creatures of law, but political will drives so much of this. Will there be political will in the House to impeach? And I mean like Tuesday or Wednesday. And it looks like they're going that way. Because usually the way these things go is things happen and then people cool off, they sleep on it, and they end up at the let's just move on. Does not look like that's happening here, and that's a good thing. Will it be enough political will to get the president impeached by the House this week? I believe if there is a Senate trial, I think there will be. I think it will be after January 20th. That's number one. Number two, eyes on Mike Pence. The reporting has sort of gone back and forth, but to me, it is all gravitating around him not being super interested in this 25th Amendment thing. And number three, what are prosecutors doing and what are they going to do? I think the answer is, you know, it's just not enough time for prosecutors to do much meaningful. They need to continue to round up people who are in the Capitol. They've already started doing that, and that should continue every day. But in terms of some of the bigger targets, the inciting, aiding, and abetting targets, there's not going to be resolution on that between now and January 20th. But what will the new DOJ commit to, or at least signal they're interested in doing along those lines? This is going to be a major decision for Merrick Garland when he takes office. Is to what extent do you pursue these crimes? And I'm not on board with this idea of, well, we don't look back, we need to move on. Guess what? That's what prosecutors do. Every case ever charged in human history looks back. It's about something that happened in the past. Okay, so prosecutors should not be about moving on and, you know, reconciliation. That's not the role of the prosecutor. That's the role maybe of politicians. So I hope that DOJ commits to getting answers here and demanding and ensuring real accountability.
Yeah, no, that's actually a distinction that I make in a lot of my law school classes, that is lost, I think, even on law students, that legislation is prospective. Let's make a rule governing lots of people in the future, and it applies to a lot of people, but anything in court is retroactive. You're calling balls and strikes about discrete individuals. Okay, this is so fun. I just can't help but one last question.
Go ahead.
I care so much about the Constitution. And I think Bill Barr, who's now kind of gracefully, astonishingly got out, and he deserves, I think, some real scrutiny and criticism. However, he did manage to politicize the Department of Justice. I wonder if you could just explain for people what it's like to stand up in federal court and say, Elie Honig, on behalf of the United States, what is the ethos of public servants?
So I don't know if this was intentional, but that's a perfect setup for a plug for my book, which is coming in July of 2021, about the Justice Department and how Bill Barr, I believe, has badly damaged that ethic, those principles. I mean, look, what you are raised with at the Justice Department, and I spent almost exactly 4 years under the Bush administration and 4 years under the Obama administration. And I joke with Preet Bharara, our U.S. attorney who took over, I said, I don't remember the day you started. I actually don't. It didn't make a damn bit of difference to what we did, because the only two things you have as a federal prosecutor, to have that privilege to stand up and say in court, Your Honor, Your Honor, Elie Honig, for the government, for the United States of America, is your credibility and your independence. Credibility, Bill Barr lied to us over and over. I mean, and I know he made a little bit of a turn his last couple of days in office. It does not begin to undo or sort of remedy all the damage, but he lied to us. Most fundamentally on the Mueller report, which, by the way, I still believe, and I make the case in the book, had he not lied to us, had he simply given us Mueller's own summaries, I don't think Trump would have survived that. I think Trump only was able to do this stuff that he's done the last couple of weeks because Bill Barr lied to us a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And he lied many times over the course of his term since then on matters large and small that I sort of lay out in the book. So credibility has to be restored at DOJ. You have to have leaders. And again, I served under John Ashcroft, Alberto Gonzalez, Michael Mukasey, all Republican AGs, and then Eric Holder. Maybe you don't always agree with all their policies, but nobody that I was aware of in DOJ ever wondered, is that person lying to the public? Is that person being truthful with the public? The other one is independence from politics. And again, it's okay to implement your administration's policy goals through DOJ. We're going to emphasize civil rights. We're going to emphasize opiates enforcement, whatever. That's all fair game. But when it comes down to actual individual prosecutions, politics should have no part in it. We had Donald Trump openly doing that daily on his Twitter feed, and Bill Barr following right along. And I hope, I don't know Merrick Garland personally, but everything I've heard about him is that he will be right down the middle. I do know Lisa Monaco personally, who is the number 2, and I somewhat know Vanita Gupta, who's going to be the number 3. And I will promise you, they will be right down the middle in terms of political independence. So it's so key that DOJ gets back to those core principles that I talk about in my book, which is available for pre-sale on Amazon and other pages right now. So good
great.
setup.
Well, thanks a lot. And I hope we can have conversations about the book when it's out, and we'll be in better time and maybe in the interim. But I want to thank you, Elie. I know you're really, really busy at CNN, and we'll probably have another intense week.
Thank you. You too, Kim. I have one quick question for you. You would live in DC, Baltimore?
I live in Chevy Chase, right outside of DC.
So I can Ravens or Washington football team? What's your pick?
I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. I started in Buffalo.
Well,
I grew up there, so their chicken wings galore yesterday, right?
Yeah. Hey, that was a close call though. You were nervous there, right?
Oh, I know, and I remember the last time they were 25 years ago. I'm dating myself when it was such a thrill. So we did have a positive note back in the snowy snowy mountains of Buffalo, New York. But anyway,
well,
so
I'm
people
an
are,
Eagles
people
fan,
are waiting.
so I'll adopt the Bills for now. How about that?
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Elie. Have a great Sunday, and everyone, thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks for
Simple Politics. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.